I'm Jennifer Byrne, and thanks for joining me tonight as we explore the world of biography, or to be a bit less formal about it, the way we get to look into each other's lives. It used to be kings, generals and serious artistes who merited their own biographer, but now it can be anyone. It can be a sports star at the end of a grand career or a pop star at the very beginning. With its honourable history and hugely varied present, biography is far and away the most popular form of non-fiction, and we've assembled 4 fabulous writers in the field to talk about why and how to write a good one. They've all done it, but their methods and subjects have been very different, so let's meet them. Jacqueline Kent is an author, book editor and, most importantly for this program, an award-winning biographer. Her book on the life of Beatrice Davis won the National Award for Biography, among other prizes. And her latest is the story of Hepzibah Menuhin, the talented but troubled sister of violin virtuoso Yehudi. It's collected a string of shortlistings in recent months, and we welcome her to the show. Thanks for coming in again. Now, Graeme Blundell is a writer, actor, director and producer for theatre, film and television. He co-authored Whiteley, An Unauthorised Life with Margot Hilton, while his biography, King, Life and Comedy of Graham Kennedy, was a critically acclaimed bestseller, which he achieved without actually ever interviewing his subject. He's also just released his own autobiography, The Naked Truth. Lovely to have you back on the club.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Now, Peter Fitzsimons represented Australia as a wallaby and went on to become a wildly successful newspaper columnist, broadcaster and prolific author. In fact, one of the most widely read non-fiction writers in this country, with a string of best-selling biographies from rugby greats Nick Farr-Jones to sporting icons Les Darcy and Stephen Waugh, to war heroine Nancy Wake, to ex-Labor leader Kim Beazley. Plus, most recently, books on Tobruk and Kokoda. Phew. Bless him, though. He's found time to join us here tonight, and lovely to have you, Pete. Now, Christine Wallace is a biographer and political journalist who has caused more than a few stirs in her time. Her first, a portrait of John Hewson, is said by some pundits to have done as much damage to Hewson's political career as the infamous birthday cake. And her unauthorised and controversial biography of Germaine Greer was lashed by its formidable subject, while the author was called, I believe, a dung-eating beetle.
Do I look like a dung-eating beetle?
Her latest book is on Don Bradman, and we are thrilled to have her with us tonight too. Thank you for coming in. Now, that pretty much covers the gamut of the type of writing. Let's start with subject.
I was a complete accident. Well, I am an accidental biographer. I mean, I've acted many other people for many years in all sorts of different circumstances, but I fell into biography when my then wife, Margot Hilton, was offered the job of writing a biography of Brett Whiteley, not that long after he died. I happened to intercept the phone call that came from the publisher, who I knew, and said, oh, we could write this together. That totally appalled my wife, then wife, and
well,
the project started off... So I was an accidental biographer. I fell into this totally by accident. The project went, pear-shaped very quickly when she became involved with a person who'd been involved with Mrs. Whiteley 20 years earlier, and she ran away with this particular chap. So I was then accidentally writing this biography with, in the middle of the life-art dichotomy. So I was the accidental biographer. When Kennedy came up, I just kind of decided I'd become so obsessed with biography by this stage that I would continue with Graham Kennedy.
What about you, Jacqueline?
I think I get interested in people's stories. I just sort of look at somebody and someone's life story and think, And the last 2 I've done, which have been on a book editor and a concert pianist, Beatrice Davis and a concert pianist, they're both slightly cranky women. They're kind of, I like sort of unexpected people, who just don't do what people think that they should do. And particularly women, because given when these 2 were born, the women were very much constrained in their ideas, attitudes, and they were told who they had to be. Neither of the women in my last 2 books have done that at all.
Yes.
And that's why I like them, because they're cranky, they're a little bit wrong-headed sometimes, but they're always incredibly interesting and unexpected. I think that's what it is, really.
What about you?
I'm in it for the story. I love to go into it and think, geez, what about that? And so at the moment, I'm doing Kingsford Smith, and I started, you know, looking, before I signed on to do it, what? He was at Gallipoli, and he was at the Western Front, and what? He flew against the Red Baron, and, you know, he did from San Francisco to Brisbane, you know, and you get into it, and it's a great story. And there are other times that I've begun a project, and you're just going, oh, I'm wanting to get into this, I'm wanting to love it, but I'm hating it. And so it's a combination of, I need to think it is a cracker story, but I also want to think, I reckon they'll think it's a cracker story too, because I think, you know, I want it to sell.
Yeah, and that's a really important consideration.
Is there any other way?
I'll discuss, yes.
Christine.
The thing that hasn't come through in all of this is the immense pain and agony of writing a book. You know, 80,000, 100,000, 120,000 words. It's got to be something really important to get you through that slog. People talk about running marathons. We've just seen it in the Olympic. This is like running a series of marathons. I mean, you've run about 20 of them from the look of your stack.
Yeah.
So what motivates me is a really important topic, not just a fascinating life, not just a big story, but something that really, really matters. It's got to be very important to get me through the 80, 100,000 word, 120,000 word barrier. It's a big ask.
I'm interested in social history, I think, and cultural history, and I like, through the books I've done, sort of screening social and cultural history through the life of the person that I'm dealing with.
When you took on Whiteley, did you have any idea that it was going to be such a battle? In fact, you said during the writing that I think a family is the enemy of a biographer.
I think, well, I certainly learnt that the hard way. It was incredibly difficult.
You're all going, yeah.
No one initially would speak to us about Brett Whiteley. The family became extraordinarily difficult, as you would expect, because they're a litigious family. In the end, even all the published words, even broadcast published words of Brett Whiteley were withdrawn, taken away from us. So they had to all be originalised in the end. It was an extraordinarily complicated process.
Can I say, it's an interesting ethical dilemma for when you do authorised biographies. If I sign on to do your authorised biography, once you say, OK, you can tramp around in my life, I owe no more duty to you, OK? If you've let me in, I'm going to find what I'm going to find. But the ethical dilemma is, what do I owe your wife? What do I owe your father? What do I, when I find out stuff about them, even if it's hugely significant to your life, it's very difficult. Well, but hang on, they didn't sign on for this, you know. And I've struggled with that over the years of how you sort that out about you've got your main target, if I can put it like that, the people in the inner circle.
And pretty much, with the exception of Les Darcy, because he was passed, you've known all your subjects, haven't you? And in some cases, in the case of Nick Farr-Jones, I mean, your best friends.
My best friend.
How compromising in its own way as that?
Oh, but I mean, when I was doing with Nick, I love Nick, but I toured with Nick, you know, and Wallaby tours and so forth. And at one point, you know, 12 years into our friendship, I'm writing his biography, and Nick said to me, and then I gave my life to Jesus Christ. And I said, you did what?
Yes.
What? Why did you do that? And then this stuff came out about Nick's whole Christian life that I had no idea of.
Wow.
And you know, and so the thing is, if everybody thinks of their own best friend, what do you know about that person? What do you know about where they were born, their first loves, the seminal moments in their life? Because you know them. Not on the surface, I knew Nick quite deeply, but there was stuff that came out that I had no idea about. And what you want, I think, with everybody that you do a biography of, you're trying to get to the core of the person.
Is that sometimes very discomforting?
Extremely. It really can be. I mean, in my case with Fitzsimons, what you're looking for, as Peter said, is the stuff that people never write down and never talk to people about. And that makes life really hard, especially if you're dealing with people and you're looking at sort of a lot of documentary evidence and so forth. But there are some ways of finding it. But the hardest thing for me is when I discovered that Hepzibah had left her husband and 2 kids, and I thought, oh, I don't want her to do that. I didn't want her to do that. Why did she do that? So that brings up a whole bunch of ethical dilemmas for you, because you have to work out what you think about her having done that, etc., etc. And I think that does come up all the time.
I believe the French concept is that everybody has un jardin secret, the secret garden in their life. And it may be that I like wearing tiaras on a Saturday night. Okay, it's not, but that would be. It's not.
Found the lock.
Okay, it's not, but that would be an example. Okay, now if you were writing my biography, I like to think when you're doing the biography absolutely right on the money, you find a whiff of their jardin secret. You find their secret garden.
Discovered cross-dressing at the age of 8.
But you don't. If it's a very deeply personal thing, I sort of like to close the gate and walk away, you know, because it's so personal, and if it's not hugely significant to the life. In the Cheryl Kernow's biography, The Woman Most Likely, or her autobiography, the one about whether or not she includes...
And whether she didn't include her affair
Gareth
with
Evans.
Senator Gareth Evans.
I passionately believe that you had to have that in, because...
But that's a judgment call.
OK, that's a part of her jardin secret, the whole Gareth Evans thing. That had to be in because you couldn't talk about her political seduction without going into the physical relationship. That's significant. So that's when you don't walk away. But there are other things.
I would have preferred that to have been left out, quite honestly. I could have done without that story.
You withheld information about Graeme Kennedy, didn't you? I mean, the fact that it's become quite obvious later on because of the various legal actions. Not against your book, that he was homosexual, but you trod around very lightly.
You said that in your review in The Age, and I disagreed with that.
This was 2 years ago.
Right. I remember
Not that
every
he's
single
worrying
word
about it.
of that review. No, I didn't tread around it. It just wasn't the level and the degree and the intensity of his homosexuality wasn't completely relevant to the kind of story that I was telling, which was really, in some respects, an analysis of the style of comedy that he developed, and a look, as I say, at this kind of social history of Australia, screened through ideas about comedy. So it was a kind of... The book wasn't there. I did deal with a number of his affairs, a number of his relationships, though the telly movie that was shown recently was completely erroneous in a number of things. It included a couple of stories that I deliberately didn't put in, including one about where Graeme was supposed to have put a young male dancer in the boot of his car to drive him past the security guards and the crowd outside GTV. That wasn't true.
We've all done that.
You've never fitted a boot of a car.
Hold on, he's a rugby player, though.
Yeah. Let me ask you directly. Did you leave stuff on the cutting room floor, effectively? Did you cut out stuff for the sake of his reputation or for kindness?
I was just desperate to get stuff. I mean, the point that Christine made in the beginning, it's a terrible slog, and part of the slog is just getting the material. You know, just finding it and then editing and collating it to bring about what Peter called a cracking good story. That's a tremendously complicated thing, just to get the material, to fill the gaps, to fill the holes. It's terribly hard.
It took you how many years?
8 years with Graeme to research that. And,
Gee, that's a long time.
Yes.
Gosh.
There's actually a very simple, absolute test that political journalists use every day of their professional career about politicians that applies to this case. Say you find out something terrible about the personal life of a politician. The test in the press gallery is, has it affected policy or not? Has it affected Australian national life or not? Could it jeopardise those things? If the answer's no, then generally it's not reported. If the answer's yes, it has to be reported, and that's why I would agree with you and not you on the Cheryl Kernot example. The fact that Cheryl Kernot had a long affair with Gareth Evans was completely material to how political history then unfolded. To omit that is not tenable.
So if you were covering the White House and you found out about Monica Lewinsky, do you publish or not publish?
I wouldn't have, and I wouldn't have published JFK's affairs. However, I would, for example...
You'd have to put another man on for that one.
I wouldn't... Well, listen, I wouldn't mind covering that one myself.
In the realm of authorised biographies, you ideally will have a relationship of trust with the person, whereby they understand. I always make it absolutely clear, I run it, I own it. You sit still and I will paint, and you may not like the way I draw your nose or your eyebrows. Too bad, I'm drawing. So I own it and I will have editorial control, and I have that contractually written in. I'm very interested to consult with you, and the red pen I pass you will be to look for factual errors, and nothing else.
What about, Christine, like with your biography of Germaine Greer? Well, you couldn't give them the red pen, obviously.
I wanted...
I'm sure you wanted to, but she didn't want to touch your pen, your book, or you, obviously. I think flesh-eating bacterium was another fine description. She's very...
Very biological, isn't she?
Yes, indeed.
I was a press gallery journalist working for the Financial Review at the time. The Houston book had come out, and I wanted to do a really big subject next, you know, that having been a quick classic political biography in the run-up to an election. And so I went looking for the Australians that had really affected the world, and there were really only two that had really had a gigantic impact. One's Rupert Murdoch, and the other was Germaine. She's a politician. She changed the course of a generation, you know, thinking way of life in the Western world with her book, The Female Eunuch. So I, you know, full of bonhomie and joie de vivre and enthusiasm and optimism, wrote off to Germaine in Cambridge. And back came this blistering attack. I just couldn't believe it. So, you know, political journalists don't like being treated like crap. So second letter went off very polite, and again, this smashing torpedo came at me, and I just couldn't understand it.
Did you never think, maybe I won't do this? Maybe she is so resistant. Or that would be spoiling the fun.
Jennifer Byrne, you're an Australian journalist, you know better than Australian,
But I'm rather nervous about Jermaine's rage.
Australian journalists make wallabies look like cream puffs.
There is an irony, though, isn't there? Because these people, some of these people become so significant. They manipulate the media also in terms of gaining their significance. Certainly in the case of Brett Whiteley and Graeme Kennedy and Germaine Greer, then they're incredibly resentful in some cases that the media decides to take a closer look at them.
But the great thing is why it tells you something about that person. And it was only right at the end of the project I realised why Germaine was so resistant. And it wasn't that there was some extraordinary secret garden story that hadn't been told. For God's sake, she'd mined all of those throughout her life and her own work. It was that she was intellectually defensive. She was worried that someone would stand back and review her life's work and see the big, cracks running through the marble.
Which is what you did. Which is what you did in that book.
I'm an admirer, but I'm not an uncritical admirer, and no biography should suspend their critical faculties in the way you just described.
I'd like to ask specifically to you, because you, as you say, you want to sell. And partly, of course, it's money, but partly it's because you want an audience, you want people to read, you want to excite them about these books.
I go back to what Christine said, is that when you bury your life in the life of another, with Kim Beazley, and I liked him a great deal, and I still do, his life was crushing my life. It was crushing the life of the family because it was, 18 months of doing it and getting it. And if at one point, it was intellectually taxing because he went from aviation to defence to finance minister and all these strange landscapes I knew nothing about. And if at any point in 12 months I could have pressed a red button and walked away with honour, I would have slammed it down. But the only way I could get Kim to stand up and stop suffocating my family was to finish the damn book. And at the end of that kind of suffering, not suffering, but, the end of that kind of immersion, at the very damn least I wanted to sell well.
That's right, of course.
Of course.
My wife used to say that she went to bed with 2 Graemes every night, and that she often had the laptop in bed and would fall asleep, and she'd say that she used to extract the other Graeme, not always so gently, from my arms and put him on the floor.
Really? I mean, he was so much part of your life.
Yeah, for that time, absolutely. And she got so sick of me telling Graeme Kennedy, king of comedy jokes, she used to run outside into the garden. Don't tell me that story again! Some biographers call it walking in the shoes of the subject, and often it's very hard to take the shoes off.
Yes. What about you? I mean, you walked in unusual shoes, both of them.
Yes.
Was Hewson antagonistic to the book or just ignored you?
Well, Hewson actually had an authorised biography on the go from someone who was on his staff and who moved to another Liberal politician's staff to write that book. So I was being fended off and fended off and fended off, hoping I would drop off, and that's not my style.
Clearly.
Clearly. But it actually was a tremendous benefit to the book because had I got the early, easy interviews with Hewson, instead of a couple of, derisory ones at the end in his sweaty jogging gear, I wouldn't have spent so much time in the Securities Commission office researching his old company returns and parts of the story which ended up being quite relevant during the election campaign.
Well, let me ask you,
his negative gearing behaviour and so forth might not have got the time that they did.
Let me ask you, are you deep down a bit suspicious of authorised biographies? Because in a sense...
I'm not suspicious of them. I hold them generally in absolute contempt. I don't...
Hold them in low
Another
regard.
gin, please.
Do tell!
I think the concept of authorised is so inimical to the process of thinking and writing that it's just not on. And personally, I would never read a book related to the word authorised. I just would not do it.
You reviewed my Beazley book positively and it was authorised.
But you use authorised in a particular way.
Yes.
You, in my view, do not do authorised biographies because you retain your authorial independence. That's not an authorised biography.
I think that's quite right.
That is a biography. that is a biography written with the cooperation of the subject.
And that's okay.
So
That's a completely different thing.
Okay, all right, there's a different definition.
But I challenge anyone to show me a real authorised biography that is an absolute milksop pat.
You've talked actually about the lateral anecdote, the thing that illuminates from the side. You've talked about the killer anecdote, and that this in lots of ways is a really great way to see through to the truth and so on. But how do you know when it's actually just, it's not a revealing mirror into their true character. It's just they had a bad day. They woke up,
Yeah.
the cat scratched them, their kid didn't sleep. You know, how do you know the difference between a killer anecdote and actually
But
something
if you're a
which is
good writer,
distraction?
if you're a good writer, you can make that interesting.
Oh, it'll always be interesting,
But
but is it right?
there is another test, and that is you know it's a killer anecdote if it relates to the larger truth you've discovered about your subject.
Yeah. That's right.
It might be a great story, that's different, but it's a killer. It's an absolute on the money one if it relates and informs and illuminates the very core of your subject.
Although I would say, if I always love, if even if this is my target, if I spy something fantastic over here, and it's not necessarily got everything to do with my target, too bad. I mean, when I was doing Kim had a fascinating political career, and there weren't many fascinating parts in 1990 and 91. But right next to him, Hawke and Keating were going at each other like two cats in a sack. And so the way I got around it was, just hang there, Kim, for a sec. Let's go bang, bang, bang. And I just put dollops of Kim in to justify it. It's the most titanic struggle of our age.
Kim could not believe what he'd heard.
No, but that's right. But that's right, because it's just too good to leave out. And I don't particularly care that on the front cover it said Beazley. This here is a killer story as well.
But often the little stories are the killer stories too. I know Graeme Kennedy once said, for example, you know, this is the king of television. He said, in order to be a personality on television, you first have to prove that you don't have any. Now, if that's not one of the most brilliant
That's
summings up of the
fascinating.
nature of television.
Yes.
So it's often these little moments, the little aphorisms, the little stories, the little
Incredibly
statements that...
perceptive.
Yeah.
And the other thing is they're often hidden. Because I know with Germaine, you know, the Untamed Shrew part of the title came from reading her PhD thesis in a library in Cambridge. And I was curious from the vantage point of Australia about why this couldn't be borrowed, why it had never been published, why was there no copies circulating. And of course, when I got there and read it, I realised why. It was just before her marriage to Paul Defer for 3 weeks and just before she wrote The Female Eunuch. And the heart of her PhD thesis was how much she, her obvious longing to be a Kate to Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew story, how this was the highest form of love. And of course, in The Taming of the Shrew, Kate is tamed, is crushed, is brought under heel by Petruchio. So this wasn't exactly a kosher position for someone who, within months, wrote The Female Eunuch, because it was so directly a contradiction.
Now, would you allow yourself to be the subject of a biography? And if so, who would you allow to do it?
Wow. I think if you are in the game, you've got no right to say no yourself.
Yes.
I don't live the sort of life where that will be necessary, luckily. But if it did happen, definitely Blanche. I think she's far and away my favourite Australian biographer.
I would rather not. I'd rather probably do it myself, and I'd like to think that I'm only up to chapter 4 in my life right now. I would. I want to think I haven't broken into stride. I would have anybody do it bar Chris Masters. I would not like Chris Masters to do my life because he is so thorough, you know, so fantastic, he'd miss nothing.
Blanche Delpouget, preferably not, because you're going to save it for yourself. You have done the job
I have done it.
yourself. Was that to get in ahead of any other flesh-eating bacterium?
It could have been. I remember Philip Adams telling me years ago that Barry Humphries had come to him and said there's some people lurking around wanting to write his story. And Philip said, well, just write it yourself and preempt them, which is kind of what I've done with my book. But I think I'd probably, if I was being done, I'd like someone like Peter Temple, a great crime writer who writes beautiful, sharp, elided prose, to sort of take my life apart and put it back together again with his kind of sense of prose majesty in a way.
Jackie?
I actually disagree with Peter about Chris Masters. I'd say Chris Masters because he's thorough.
He didn't tell you, though, that Chris Masters hates him.
I meant that respectfully of Chris because he's so good and so thorough.
Yes,
You know.
I know, yeah. Only the reason is because I worked with him a bit on the book that he did about Alan Jones. I did some early stuff with that. And I know how careful and scrupulous and accurate
And that's the
he
core thing for you, that it be
Yeah.
accurate. But can anyone really
accurate?
get
No.
anyone?
Yes.
I think
Just
you can
finish
get,
on a
I think you can get bits.
Yes,
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 yeah.
You get.
Yeah.
Max Sachs sent me off to do a profile for the Independent Monthly once of Don Russell, who worked for Paul Keating.
Yep.
And the brief was, find out what he thinks and find out why he thinks it. And if you answer that question in a biography, you've basically nailed it.
Well, that's true.
It's the great
Yeah.
question. It's the great mystery. It's what we love about what we do.
Do you all love
That's
it?
true.
For all the pain and the consumption of years and the loss of sleep, do you love it?
Sometimes.
Oh, yes, you become obsessed by it.
Sometimes a lot. Sometimes not so much, but basically,
To solve the mystery of the person.
Yes.
I love it too
who
much.
is, what's this person like? Yeah, I know. It's the same, isn't it?
I love it too much in the sense of I've constantly got to say, you know, I've got to get back out. Do you know what I mean? Like you can just get so lost in it that you've got to consciously say, well, what about my life? You know, I've got, you know what I mean? That you're so absorbed by it.
Well, our lives in their hands. I trust them. A huge thank you to my guests tonight, Jacqueline Kent, Graeme Blundell, Peter Fitzsimons and Christine Wallace. Please thank them. Do please join us again for more books on Sunday, December the 7th. That's when our bumper First Tuesday Book Club Summer Special will be going to air. Something to really look forward to. Thank you very much for watching and very happy reading until we meet again. Good night.